It's been a long time since I've seen such an immense drop-off my own personal interest in a series from episode 1 to episode 2. In a way then, The Detective Is Already Dead has bypassed the rest of summer 2021 for how much it will stick in my mind years down the line, and that at least is an achievement. Episode 1 is awesome. A witty detective, a likable protagonist, and a bombastic airplane hijacking that explodes into a Sakuga-filled thrilling battle sequence. Cool spy stories are, at least in my experience, surprisingly sparse in anime, with the only truly great one I've seen being Princess Principal. I thought it was about damn time we got another good one, and I was locked in for another jetpack joyride of an adventure, spanning multiple different cultures and experiencing some fun-ass spy missions. And the second half of the episode proves that such a formula would work perfectly with these characters, showing a local case about a bathroom hanako taking place at a school festival. It's a very low-key mystery, with the stakes not being very high, but I found it to be immensely entertaining nonetheless. This is because the two main leads, Kimizuka and Siesta, have amazing chemistry together, and were always a joy to watch on the screen. I was half expecting Kimizuka to have a more bland personality to pair with the latter's goofily mysterious presence, but he's just as interesting. Someone who just wants to live a mundane life because he has been swamped with the worst luck imaginable, roped into dangerous situations on the daily. Not even just that, but he is filled with personality, and the scenes between him and Siesta wouldn't feel out of place in the Monogatari series. And if you've seen even the first episode of Bakemonogatari, you know that is immense praise. After watching the first episode, all I wanted to do was watch an entire series following the crazy adventures of Siesta and Kimizuka as they navigate life as young spies, experiencing wholly different worlds and perhaps even developing some romantic feelings for each other. I would have given it a high 7, maybe even an 8, and walked away fully satisfied. But of course, that isn't possible, because the story is already over. The detective is already dead. Of course, with the title of the anime itself, I knew this was always the case, but I was left wondering how they would pull this off. Surely they wouldn't just kill off easily the most interesting character, the one in all the promotional art, and the mascot for the entire series, right? Well, 4 episodes in, and this seems to be the case. After a great opening episode, I almost dropped it after finishing the second. But why would they do this? And why is it so detrimental to the series? It all comes down to one of fiction's most detrimental obsessions: premise. The concept of storytelling has been around even longer than written language has, so stories now need to stand out from the innumerable amount of fiction that precedes it. Fiction is all fundamentally connected, with newer stories being built off the foundation of all that came before it. However, why would someone want to experience the same story twice? To avoid this, the latter work needs to twist the formula, have an eye-catching and noticeable difference from the initial stories, and needs to have an interesting premise. This all makes complete sense, but it can also be detrimental to the fiction it's meant to promote. This happens when the premise becomes everything. All of the thought towards a project goes into that unique twist that will make it stand out, leaving little creative energy towards the actual plot and action. I've seen countless stories that sacrifice everything for their premise, making plot decisions not because they organically spawn from the foundations of the story, but because it makes it stand out more. After a while, it all becomes nonsensical, and that's the main issue here: premise over organic quality. This principle applies to all fiction, but anime is especially susceptible to this as it becomes more and more popular. Formula and tropes are rampant in the industry as anime continues to be pumped out at an increasing rate. This is due to a few factors: that much of anime source material comes from inexperienced authors that tend to rely on formula earlier in their careers, that most anime is aimed at a niche audience that tends to enjoy a lot of the same thing, and a few others, but the most noticeable to me is the sheer quantity of anime being produced. To best analyze this, we can take a look at isekai anime. It's common knowledge in the community that, fundamentally, almost all isekai are relatively the same, but that they commonly add 1 or 2 unique twists to make them stand out. They put a laser focus on an interesting premise, mostly to the suffering of the rest of the story's elements. So, anime is obsessed with premise in order to stand out in a vast sea of seasonal shows and manga. But how does this apply specifically to The Detective Is Already Dead? I think it should be obvious by now that I believe premise is what ultimately killed the detective, but I actually think this is an even more egregious case than normal. As I said earlier, literally all I want is to watch an anime based around Kimizuka and Siesta's adventures together. I mean, shit, they literally spent 3 years as a team. That's what I want to see, and would have been quite satisfied with that. But that doesn't get clicks. It doesn't stand out. In the general audience's mind, it's just some formulaic spy show. They're not going to bother to waste their time on it, so they're probably never going to realize that it's actually a really fun adventure. I mean, there's a reason why Princess Principal isn't very popular, at least here in the West. But let's say if the anime pronounced loud and clear that the mascot character, the detective, is already dead, it'll make everyone pause. They'll wonder how that would pan out if she really is going to stay dead, or if there's some bigger secret in there. They'll watch the first episode, and at that point, the production committee is banking on a decent amount of that audience, staying to watch the whole thing even if most people didn't like it. And I hate to say it, but that probably worked. I mean, I only watched it because of the twist, and I'll probably continue tuning in every week to see how it works out. But as I said, the second episode is a complete drop-off from the first, and this is mainly due to the fact that because of the unique premise, the show's most interesting character has to be killed off, ruining the impeccable chemistry she has with the protagonist. And of course, anime likes to have its cake and eat it too, so instead of Siesta, they have a new female lead who quite literally has the heart of Siesta, and acts as a quasi-version of her. It's a rather cheap ploy to make us care about this new character, and it never really comes off as anything but cheap. Seeing her say she's a legendary detective is annoying rather than endearing, because we know that, unlike Siesta, this new girl has literally no experience in the field. And now that the audience is focused on how she is sort of becoming Siesta's new avatar, we can't really start to become attached to her as her own character. She is instead forced to live in the far less interesting shadow of the detective we all wish were there in her place. Perhaps if this was the end of it, I can still enjoy my time, but for whatever reason, Kimizuka's personality falls off a literal cliff. It blows my mind how a character can go from Araragi comparisons to bland black-haired pro-tag-kun, but it happened. I figure this is again due to the shattered chemistry he had with Siesta, and how without it, the writer had no idea how to build this character. Or maybe this is his character development, him becoming a cynical person after Siesta's death, being handled rather poorly. I'm not too sure. I realize this is way too much criticism to heap on a series which, at the time of writing, only has 4 episodes out. Normally, I would wait longer before forming such a solidified opinion, but I think this case is again unique, and speaks to a fundamental problem that the anime can't believably fix. Simply put, the first episode gave me exactly what I wanted out of the series, but the premise serves to make it impossible for such a series to exist. It saddens me that there will almost certainly never be an anime centered around these two characters that I've grown to love together in such a short time. Every minute of watching, I'm just wishing for Siesta to come back somehow, but that would also quite literally shatter any organic and believable storytelling the series is desperately holding on to. I am honestly not sure which route I would prefer at this point, and I've thought that maybe I never should have watched the first episode at all. So while it's very early on to have such a heavy-handed criticism of the detective is already dead, my largest issue is that, well, the detective is already dead. That, paired with the rather messy episode 3 and 4, makes an anime I loved from the first episode into something I disliked by the second. All because it needed to stand out from the crowd. All because it needed to add an interesting twist to things. In the end, premise truly did kill the detective.